All right. Welcome to episode 7 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. Dr. Greer, it's been a really long time. It's been a few weeks since we've done an episode because you've been a very busy man. You've been on the road doing all kinds of shows. Do you want to tell us a bit about what the last 2 weeks have been like for you?
Well, in the middle of several weeks of traveling and being on half a dozen major podcasts and shows, you've all seen we did the executive order recommendations for the president, which has been reviewed by them. And in the middle of it, I just put it out there. My appendix ruptured and I had emergency surgery about March 5th. And we were in Austin. And the day before, I had been on the Chad Robin Show program podcast, and he's a great guy. He's a military Marine special projects guy who has this wonderful podcast, great military following, helps get the word out. He's also friends with senior military people, so he's back channeling our information to some key people dealing with military and national security. So Chad's awesome. I went from there in North Houston to Austin, and I was on. When I got there, I had to go straight to the ER. So I knew the drill. Luckily, I had a family member who knew, had a friend whose husband is a doctor in in Austin, and I knew I was having a rupturing appendix. So after we got it all imaged, I went straight up to surgery on Wednesday, March 5th, the night, and had emergency surgery, and it had perforated. It was very dangerous, could have killed me. And went home back to the hotel where we were staying, checked in. And then the next day, got myself up and walked around 1.5 miles or so in Austin, and then went and was on the Jesse Michaels program, which will come out pretty soon. And then the day after that was on, there's a conservative host named Alex Jones, who has always wanted me in studio. So I went to his. Now, these podcasters didn't know I was just out of emergency surgery, but you know, I just sort of push on. People who know me go, "Oh my God, you gotta be kidding!" But it was pretty bad. Right before that, Khloe Kardashian, who had me on her show, and it came out that week also. And then I had been also on DJ Vlad TV, and in studio with him. It was a lot of fun. But one of the things that's happened I want to address. And I know people new to this subject, and we live in a hyper-partisan era, have said kind of, well, why were you on Chloe's show? Because she's a liberal. Or why were you on this show? Because they're conservative. I'm going, this is the Global Disclosure Project. So let me tell everyone right now and just lance this boil. The policy for 35 years has been this issue transcends not just partisan politics and a little 4.5% of the world population known as the United States of America. It transcends it globally. And so the project has always been forward and outward looking to 8 billion people on planet Earth, what they need to know and what they need to understand to help us get to a new era and transform the current state to another one. If you look at what I wrote and said during the Clinton years, I made it very clear this has to be nonpartisan. I was not part of a political machine when I was briefing the CIA director for Bill Clinton, who obviously was a Democrat. And same thing when I was providing information to people in the first Trump administration or now, or when I was providing material straight to President Obama through his inner circle, etc. Now, the same thing is true of Congress. I have done briefings for people who are committee chairs and key committees when the Congress has been headed and controlled by a Democrat or a Republican, and every 2 to 4 years it shifts. So I need people to wake up out of what I call the Truman Show, that hilarious film with Jim Carrey, where he wakes up one day and realizes he was just in a staged thing. So all this sort of bickering and divisive tribalism that is the bane of humanity is not something we respond to or buy into. We're providing whoever has the office of the presidency. It's the office of the presidency we deal with. Whoever is the Minister of Defense of Canada could be a socialist, could be a conservative. Same thing in Australia when I briefed that gentleman. I didn't care what political party he was part of. He was in that position for one of the Five Eyes, spy cooperative, as it were, intelligence cooperative countries with the U.S. The Five Eyes are U.S., Canada, Great Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. I provided briefings to every Ministry of Defense for all of them except New Zealand. Now, I didn't say, well, what party are you a part of this day? You know, whatever. we can't get tied into that because the issue is so profound. It's a universal, not just a global issue. We're not alone in the cosmos. They're here. There has to be a response from not just the United States or one president or a party, but from the entirety of humanity at some point that's peaceful and appropriate. Disclosure isn't just here. The same dynamic of an illegal criminal transnational entity that has been doing this in the States is replicated in Canada, which may have a left-wing government while we have a right-wing government. But this issue transcends that. It goes beyond that. So what I'm explaining very clearly and not trying to mince words on is that we can't really change what the mission is of disclosure or peaceful CE5 contact. And when we're meeting with people by doing a litmus test of what their current political affiliations and policies are, it has to be above and beyond that, or it's going to devolve into another tribalism bickering situation. Now, this is not to dismiss the valid opinions and differences people have philosophically, politically, policy-wise across the spectrum. I'm not dismissing that. I'm just saying this issue has to be nonpartisan, but not just U.S. nonpartisan. It needs to be global. It needs to be something that's looked at through a universal lens, not just a partisan or even just an American lens. So people in other countries, look, you know, literally the United States population is 4.5%. That's all of the whole globe. So Americans, being the narcissists that they are, they think they're the only people on the planet, but they're not. And so, you know, I have dealt with people who have been ambassadors from China and, you know, cabinet level people in Japan. And I didn't do a test of say, well, what political party and belief do you have? You know, we know China's a communist state that runs very much on a totalitarian basis in terms of individual rights and freedoms and speech and press and gathering and dissent and everything else. But they have 1.4 billion people, right? And they're high tech. And they do have programs related to this. So we can't go around and say, we're not going to provide information to this demographic because it might offend someone on this part of some political spectrum. So I'm just trying to be as honest and forthright about, by the way, what I just said is what I've been saying since the early 90s. It's not changed in a third of a century.
And it's true. And whenever we've worked on the films together, you know, I like to take shots at, you know, W. Bush or Clinton, and you've pulled me back, you know, many times and said, listen, we can take jabs, but it's got to be fair. It's got to be even. Yep. So I'm really proud that no one can really look at these films and accuse us of having a political bias one way or another.
Yeah. We have to be beyond all that, only because, as I see it, the bane of human existence, what has kept fires and division and disunity and wars running for thousands of years are demagogues causing people to break into tribal camps that engage in conflict and war. It's the opposite of unity. It's the opposite of peace. Now, you know, this is not to say that there's a false equivalency of one policy or another. You know, certainly if a party is identified with the KKK, they can be called out. There have been organizations that have asked me to be keynote speakers that are heavily identified with, anti-Semitism or racism or what have you, and I won't do it. But, you know, that's different when you're dealing with the governments or the ability to reach a large swath of the population.
Dr. Your message is all about at its core, transcending speciesism between us and these advanced civilizations. And in my mind, if you can transcend speciesism and xenophobia with ETs, you've already transcended racism, misogyny, etc. So I'm surprised that you've got racist organizations who want to have you as a keynote speaker.
I have.
Yeah.
And I go, no gracias. But you can, if you were to not appear in any media in the world that's identified it with some tribal party or philosophy or what have you, where would you go? I mean, it's all become so hyper divisive and tribal and partisan. And so the truth of the matter is, I have to look at it from a higher consciousness, but also a higher strategy that transcends all those fissures and divisions. And I think humanity would be much better off if we all did that, frankly, a little bit more in this time of hyper partisan hatred and bigotry, which I don't think leads to anything but harm.
So I wanted to ask you, we recently saw Elon Musk made another appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience.
The other thing they're going to talk about is UAPs. They're going to release all the UAP information. So you're the guy to ask about this. What if any possibility is there that there is some sort of advanced propulsion system technology that's being worked on in secret? And that they're trying to cover this up with this talk of aliens and alien tech and not of this world. And is it possible that there's some sort of very secret program that's going on in cahoots with some defense contractors that are developing advanced propulsion systems that they're using for these drones?
I mean, SpaceX, my company SpaceX has the most advanced rocket technology in the world. I think I'd know.
Right.
And to the best of my knowledge, there is not any magic. There's not like some super advanced propulsion technology.
There have been people who have theorized different gravity drives and different things. Is there anything that's ever gotten past the theoretical stage?
No.
Nothing.
Well, there's nothing even that I'm aware of that works in theory. It's not like I would like this to exist, to be clear. I would like this to exist. And I have from a security clearance standpoint, I have top secret. I have equivalent of like an all access pass from a security clearance standpoint. So I don't think they're hiding it from me, basically. I don't think they could.
And by the way, he's made similar statements about ETs and UFOs in the past, which wasn't that important because he was a private businessman, and he wouldn't have any more knowledge than Joe Blow on the street, quite frankly, unless he'd studied the matter. But now that he has a key advisory capacity for the U.S. government, I think it takes on a different set of problems. So number one, let me go on the record. I do not know Mr. Musk personally at all. Never met him, never briefed him. I'm happy to do so. If anyone listening is friends with him, I'd be happy to do even off the record, in-depth briefing and provide all the evidence and materials we have for him. Number two, what he said was completely false. And the key part of what he said that was a problem is that he had a, quote, all access pass through Lockheed and Northrop Grumman, and they don't have anything more advanced than his Falcon Heavy SpaceX rocket, which is absolutely not true, 100% provably not true. I mean, one of the men on our team who's come forward recently managed the pilots out of Edwards Air Force Base who flew the man-made UFOs out of both Northrop and Lockheed from the test ranges that are out in the Mojave Desert. So excuse me, this is not something that is, true. Now, the problem is, if he doesn't know, which you know, a lot of people, I've had people say there's no way he can't know. But remember, I have done briefings for CI directors and senior people in the Senate Intelligence, Armed Services, House Oversight, who absolutely everyone would say, and also admirals and generals at the Pentagon, including 2 directors of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the biggest military intelligence entity for the U.S. military. None of them were read in. So the problem is a lot of people are happy to believe, you know, that false PR, that we don't have, there's nothing to see here. You know, they don't want you to look behind the curtain and see the Wizard of Oz pulling all these strings, right? And the strings they're pulling are the false alien events perpetrated by the use of these advanced technologies, alien reproduction vehicles, whatever you want to call them, that are man-made electromagnetic anti-gravity craft that have been used in abductions and mutilations and false flag operations since the late 1950s. Now, I will tell you that little bit of intelligence that we humans have, that technology, is a way bigger secret than the fact that there are ETs, non-human intelligence and craft. Why? Because if the president and the national military and national security folks believe what Elon said was true, then it opens the door that all the false flag frightening things that have happened are, by conclusion, alien, which that opens the door to the alien threat, and that opens the door to disclosure happening within that false narrative that leads straight to World War III and an extinction level event for the human species. This is very consequential, which is why I know there are going to be people unhappy that I'm addressing this, who are partisans, but you cannot let a falsehood like that rest. Now, if he misspoke, then he needs to then retract it after he's read in. If he's deceiving the public and by extension the president, Houston, we have a problem, a very big problem that has to be addressed, because it could lead to a catastrophic series of conclusions by people not read in at the level of the president and the new national security team, where they're going to look at all the evidence that's being gathered through false narrative operatives, let's say, like Gary Nolan at Stanford, who has a contract with the CIA to prove brain and head traumatic brain injuries from UAPs. Well, they fail to mention that all the cases that are being sent to him are the man-made cases, right? The radiation case that was in that piece with Jake Barber.
And after this particular mission, me and everyone on my team got extremely sick, like physically ill in the hospital. Within, weeks after this, I'd lost every hair on my body, and I also lost the skin on my arms.
So the skin's actually falling off your body?
Yeah, like not just falling off, like it was lopping off within a couple of days, like a severe sunburn. I ended up developing a severe heart murmur that I'd never had before.
Last year, I introduced Jake to Stanford immunology professor Gary Nolan. He's been studying anomalous injuries among US military personnel for years at the behest of the CIA. Nolan agreed to review decades of Jake's medical records.
The report reads like a bit of a horror show, to be quite honest. To me, what the first thing that came to mind was you were exposed to some kind of radiation.
That was a man-made nuclear device that he was picking up. Now, he wasn't read into that. I have been read into it. Colonel Heckert, who was at our National Press Club event in June of 2023, was read into those and was on a retrieval operation when one went bad up in Canada. He told us all about it. So the problem is that a little knowledge on this gets you into a lot of trouble. So it could be that Mr. Musk is not read in, but if he does know and he's misleading the public, but also with his shoulder-to-shoulder access to the president and the national security team, this key bit of information, that's a problem. Because remember, the reason in 2017, 18, 19, I started putting up the alarm around Luis Elizondo and others. They were saying a couple of things that are provably false. One, there's an alien threat. Well, we know from Wernher von Braun who invented the rocket for Adolf Hitler, that was always the plan hatched in the 50s, around 1953, 54, to try to eventually move the subject to disclosure, but under a false narrative, so that they could control the world through a militaristic fear, something much worse than COVID or 9/11, and stampede people into terror, okay? And then control people through fear, through this alien threat. And so that scheme, that sort of deception and false flag, people say, when is Blue Beam? I said, dude, they started Blue Beam back in the late 50s, right? They had the assets. They had operational anti-gravs. They first used people made up to look like aliens when they weren't. Later, they had the robotics, and now they have bio-nano machines, creatures that are part biological and part machine that have been doing this. As you know, because you helped find this, Jacques Vallée admits to having a CIA document from 1985 flat out stating that the CIA was faking alien abductions in Brazil and Argentina for their, and I quote, psychological warfare value. Well, that's the same thing that was written and signed by the CIA director in 1953, General Smith, who was the CIA director then, when he said the UFO subject had great value for its, and I'm quoting from the document, it's in our archive, its psychological warfare value. So it's a giant psyop. The crown jewel of the psyop and the deception is the use of these advanced technologies that we've reverse engineered and developed since way back, that are now operational, that would fool everyone that it's an alien or non-human intelligence craft or being, when it isn't. So that is, see, this is where I talk about basically what we're doing is pulling the curtain back on the Wizard of Oz, and behind that curtain is this bunch of crudmudgeons pulling levers, scaring the hell out of Dorothy and the Scarecrow, when in reality, that people are thinking it's all alien when it isn't. So if the president, it's one thing for ufology to think this. It's a very dangerous thing when this is on a fast track to disclosure this year and next, when you have the president and the Congress and whatever, the 20 million people who listen to Joe Rogan being deceived this way. So this is something that needs to get resolved. People say I'm a little too strong and confrontational about it, but I think people understood what was at stake here. They would realize that this is a 5-alarm fire when you have someone with that kind of access. And frankly, in space matters, in terms of how the current administration views him, the top of the pyramid for space, saying we don't have anything like this, that all these false events and all these false narratives have to be, all of them, alien, because we don't have that ability to fly these objects like that and elude radar and go at 300,000 miles per hour and make a right-hand turn. Sorry, folks, we do. And guess what? That is one of the things that just came out, and we now can do it hardcover and softcover, is this. So this just came out, and it's an illustrated history. It has 230 pages of not only crash retrievals, but new cases we have. And you can get it through our store and our website in a soft or hardcover or ebook. If you don't want to buy a physical copy, there's an ebook version. And the reason that's so important, it pretty much puts to rest that not only have we had the crash retrievals, there have been about 125 of them that we can document. Every one of the ones in here are ones that have named witnesses, all of them. Now, there are a few that are new ones that are whistleblowers who are just by initial, because we wanted to they did not want to be known publicly. And so we said, okay, we're going to mask your full name until you're ready to come public.
But you know who they are and you vouch for their credibility?
Oh, yeah. I've spent a lot of time with them, know them. Some of them we have brought over to the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services and to the Pentagon Aero Office. Some haven't, because like one of them was about to go. You look at the incident with the crash retrieval up in the Northern Nevada test range, and we can open it to that and show people. TE, he was on his way. We were getting his tickets, and a van pulled up, SUV black pulled up said, look at your phone. And they had put child pornography all over his computer and phone and said, we're going to put you in prison for the rest of your life. And he had 2 young boys. They said, you'll never see your children again. So his wife stopped him from coming and giving official testimony. He was prepared to come forward, but the dirty tricks by these thugs and criminals stopped him. But yeah, we know who he is. He's a great guy. But, you know, this is one of the problems that my beef with the law enforcement in the United States is that kind of witness intimidation and false entrapment are multiple felonies. And why are these people not being investigated and arrested? See, this is what I don't get. You know, I mean, we'll talk about this in a little while, what we're trying to do to resolve that problem.
Great. And you've also just published the presidential briefing book. I don't know if you
Yeah, I've never done that until now. Yeah. Yeah,
this is finally available. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is it. I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
It's in a hard copy and soft, and is it now ebook also? So it's ebook also. So you can get it. Now these are being done sort of print on demand, so they're not particularly inexpensive, but it's the best we could do to get it out. But I'll tell, excuse me, that is redacted of sensitive names and some information, tactical information that an executive order following up with let's say a tactical team to go to these illegal black sites. So I think there are 150 some that are outlined in the book. And we know where they are, and they're on a map. You can see them, but there's tactical information about how you would go in there and get them under control, what technologies you need to use. That has been redacted because it'd be sensitive operational information. And certain names, some people's names who do not want to be identified have been, notified to the president, his inner circle, and senior law enforcement. They have not been disclosed publicly because they've been asking not to be, and so, we honor that. Although sometimes we'll have someone hack into something and cause trouble by leaking a name. That just happened last week. But generally speaking, we don't do it. We try to honor everyone's request.
So the so-called disclosure bill, the Schumer amendment that is being reintroduced and is likely to pass, it calls for the creation of a, quote, controlled disclosure campaign plan, which is just unbelievable to me that they would call it that, but it calls for the creation of a 9-person review board. And so it's like, so, these 9 people, and it's like a historian, a physicist, a biologist, and and there's like a bunch of positions that have to be filled. Will get to determine what is going to be published in whatever they're going to call disclosure. So what are your sort of expectations for this commission?
Well, I think that what is the saying in the data world, garbage in, garbage out? You're not going to get anything out of a commission like that if it's populated with people who are actually clandestinely on the payroll of these covert and illegal programs. That is what has happened in every single commission since the Robertson panel of 1953 or 54. So I think the concern there is when you're not wanting something to really get exposed, you create a commission and that's where you send it to die. Everyone in Washington knows that. I mean, that's what happened with the 9/11 Commission, the JFK Assassination Committee, on and on and on. You create those bureaucracies, populate them with people who are going to cherry pick the information, come out with an already predetermined conclusion. They are never honest and they are never transparent. So I am extremely skeptical of that. I know people go, wow, you're kind of cynical. I said, no, I actually know inside and out the history of this going back 70 years. So when the Robertson panel We have in our archive a CIA document that talks about the Robertson panel, and they had embedded a very renowned astronomer at Harvard, Dr. Donald Menzel, Menzel, look him up, to be on the panel to kill any conclusions counter to the cover-up conclusions, which is what they did. Surprise. Let's fast forward about 15 years to 1969 with the Condon Committee. Professor Condon was a professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, and we have documents that now prove from the CIA officially released to us after I briefed the CIA director in 93 that state that Professor Condon was on the payroll of the CIA and was there to be sure the Condon Committee, that was this academic, we're scientists and we're going to be honest. No, they're not. They're scientists second. They're humans first, and they're fungible and corruptible. That's what happened with the Condon Committee. Their conclusion, close down Project Blue Book because there's nothing there to see. That's 1969. Look it up. I just give you a quick synopsis. That's a fact. I only deal with facts I can prove in a court or in a scientific setting. Now, you had the hearings from Gerald Ford after the imbroglio about the swamp gas in Michigan. Remember all that? That was also stacked. That hearing, and I think it was House Oversight, and Gerald Ford, who later became President Ford after Nixon resigned, really wanted to get to the bottom of it, but they stacked the people appearing before this congressman who knew nothing about the subject. This is the problem. And gaslit him. And again, it was, oh, well, there's nothing there. Look, this nonsense has been going on for 70 years. It's not going to happen that way. Now, part of the bill that got shot down in 2023, December, from the Senate, that did not come from Mr. Schumer. It came from the Senate Intelligence Committee unanimously, because I had been working with them, and it had a provision for safe harbor or amnesty for these whistleblowers. That was taken out, as was the panel part. But what we need to look at is in the new, because I was at Senate Intelligence folks, I think in October, and I said, well, is that amnesty or safe harbor legal protection going to be put back in? And they said, yes, we're working on that. So what I want to see is what actually makes it out of the Senate to the House, and if it can survive the reconciliation process, because last time it didn't. There were people in the House that killed it. It came out of the Senate overwhelmingly. It came out of the Senate Intelligence Committee unanimously. Unusual. So the question now is, because I'm on the inside of that. So the question is whether or not we're going to have a clean witness protection, amnesty, safe harbor in there. But the idea of some panel, the problem, the last iteration of it had the president appointing these people and then the Senate or somebody confirming that they'd be on the panel. Well, the politics of that are such that if there were 9 people, I'd be stunned if there was one who was actually, first, knew anything about the issue, and secondly, wasn't corrupted already through some kind of corporate or intelligence agency connection. So this is why I think that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is what we've been saying. We need an executive order from the president to have law enforcement bring out all the evidence and material. We need protections from an executive order, and you need an open hearing in the Congress, not in a SCIF, where there's subpoena power, but also a properly funded investigation, which does not exist yet in the House or the Senate, to have professional people drill down on the 760 some whistleblowers and all the other evidence we and others people have, and get to the bottom of it, and then have witnesses, testimonies provided through subpoena, because some of the most important people who need to appear aren't going to do it voluntarily. They're going to have to be compelled to provide testimony. Now, to be honest with you, I'm saying the same thing to senior law enforcement. I can't say who or where or what because it's sensitive. And in fact, I'm having meetings coming up soon with the very senior folks about that. But I think you have to go in with no-knock warrants. You have to go in with subpoenas. You have to compel testimony. You have to compel people to produce documents and material and video, photographic, and even physical evidence. I mean, there's a way to do this that isn't some kind of delaying tactic through some bureaucratic panel that's going to be chock full of, most likely, intelligence operatives, and it will be highly politically charged. So I think that is unwise, and I think that I don't know if Senator Schumer knows the history of these panels or not, but in the 10 minutes or so, I could tell him, hey, yo, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. Here's an important data point. Go into the witness files of the Disclosure Project Intelligence Archive, dpiarchive.com. And in there is the testimony of Dr. Robert Woods, wonderful man, amazing guy. He was PhD, worked for McDonnell Douglas. Old man McDonald himself had him looking into UAP, UFO stuff back in the 60s. And he had hit pay dirt. And he was supposed to be on the Condon Committee in 1969 that I just talked about. In his testimony, he states that Professor Condon, because he knew Dr. Woods had dispositive proof and evidence, didn't want him on and wanted him kicked off. So he went to McDonnell Douglas, the main guy at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft that merged with Boeing some years later, and said, that guy, Dr. Woods, is not to be on this panel, but you were to fire him. Get rid of him. He knows too much. So this was the head of the Condon Committee. Now, this is the direct testimony of Dr. Woods, who worked closely with the chairman and head of McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. Right?
So, Dr. Greer, if we get to the point where this commission is being assembled, should we as your supporters out there, should we be lobbying to get people who you recommend appointed, or is this just a complete waste of time and we should write it off before it even happens?
Look, I will provide anything to any legitimate entity who claims they're trying to get to the bottom of it, right? I've done that for the Pentagon. I've done it for Aero. I've done it for House Oversight, Senate Armed Services, Senate Intelligence Committee, and I've been doing it since 1993. All right. So I will continue to always do that. I'm talking about the likelihood that a highly politicized panel would be uncorrupted and honest and would get to the truth. That, I think, there is no historical precedent for it. And in fact, there's every historical precedent for us to be deeply skeptical. And because of the filtering effect of such a panel, where they could have people in there like Professor Condon or Dr. Menzel back in the 50s and cherry pick and kick stuff out. And what will actually be referred to that Congress and the president and the American people will be, I think, mostly an empty sack of nothing. But I can't say that's the case. I mean, maybe things would change and maybe, history won't continue to repeat itself. But given who is out there, let me give you an example. Michael Gold, who testified at the last time that the House had anybody up there a couple months ago, I had met with him, a long time, several months earlier, back in 2024, I think in the summer, and at my condo in Washington. And I gave him the briefing materials. And he had been, he's worked in NASA. He works for an aerospace company. He had been part of Bigelow Aerospace with Bob Bigelow. And I told him, I said, and he had been on the UAP task force for NASA. And he told me, well, we closed that because we didn't find anything. I said, whoa, 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 whoa. In my archive, available to everyone who can read, are hundreds of pages of government documents and 115 top secret military and corporate and government testimony, radar tapes, everything in our archive. How could you be on that committee, the task force, UAP task force for NASA? No, that was clearly a whitewash and a window dressing. And look, I'm going to call this stuff out. I don't care about, I'm not running for the mayor of Crazy Town ufology. I'm not looking for a political or government position. I don't care about fame or money. I don't care about any of it. I care about the truth and fixing this problem, right? So, but when that happens, and then you see the House Oversight Committee inviting people to give testimony who are either known disinformation people like Luis Elizondo or someone like Michael Gold who purports to know nothing, when we provided on a silver platter everything he would need to know. There's something not right here. There's something stinks in Denmark, bro. And I just am saying no. And this is my job, I feel, is even though it's not politic and it doesn't win me brownie points in the popularity contest, I don't care about that. I mean, I care about the truth coming out honestly in a way that gives us a new civilization, universal peace here in space and on Earth, that we begin to contact officially as a people, the ETs, and stop killing them and shooting them down, and that the energy technologies come out like we outlined in the Lost Century, which, by the way, now everyone can see on Tubi for free, and get that information and technology out that can transform the world in poverty and fix the biosphere indefinitely through these free energy zero-point type technologies. Now, I've said, of course, many times, the things that fly that are man-made UFOs, those really are easily converted to a weapon delivery system, and those have to be held back for some time until the geopolitical situation indicates we're halfway civilized as a people, and we ain't there yet. If you doubt it, go look at what's going on in the meat grinder in Ukraine, Russia, the Middle East, Hamas, Israel, on and on all over the world. I mean, this is humanity, because we've been held back for 100 years from our evolution. Because remember, if these technologies had come out 100 years ago, that's why we call it the Lost Century, we would have had no need to be invading other people's land for rare earth minerals or oil or anything else, because you would have had a totally different economy and technology. And we could have had an abundant, peaceful, and a just civilization where there could have been global peace, where we reach what Michikaku calls a level 1 civilization. And that could have happened before I was born in 1955. I mean, in June, I turned 70. So you think almost most of my life, we could have lived in a very different world. And when we do, then we could have peace, because when there's justice and when there's elimination of the have and have not conundrum and the Malthusian crisis that goes with it, then there's a chance you can establish peace on the planet. And in that peace, you can have this transformed situation where then everyone could have a vehicle that floats and goes. You don't need surface roads anymore. But that's going to be a while, because the world is an armed camp of everyone at each other's throats in this tribal war between different identity groups around the world, whether it be religious, political, racial, gender, whatever it is. It's this endless conflict. Until that gets resolved, excuse me, part of the resolution that is the whole reason our motto is one universe, one people, is that if we recognize that our consciousness and our higher conscious being is a singularity of the mind, and then we realize that not only are all of us one, but on that deep level, go beyond the skin deep and the intellect and the divisions, but also the ETs, these non-human life forms, are also conscious and sentient. And that is the foundation. That is the universal meeting place, is that non-local, unbounded aspect of consciousness, which is, the heart and soul of what we're doing. But certainly humanity isn't there yet. It's also armed camp. So some of these technologies are going to have to be held back for some years until that gets resolved. But we can certainly have things that would be sitting on this table here, running this house with free energy and no pollution, or in the hood of your car. You're like Floyd Sweet had, remember that part where Sparky, Floyd Sweet, had something a little bit bigger than a cigarette pack that would provide enough energy to drive a 300 horsepower motor. This was 40 years ago in the 80s. So, and that car would never have to be plugged in like the modern battery cars, which are really just souped up golf carts that plug into the fossil fuel power grid. Let's face it. I mean, they're really, I mean, they look cool. They're fun to drive and they're quiet, but it's not a solution because their energy that's charging those lithium ion batteries is coming from coal, gas, all kinds of nuclear, you know, except for maybe 12% that's renewable. And most of that's hydroelectric on dams that we're never going to build something like that again because they did so much environmental damage to create the huge dams. So, you know, the real solution is this technology, energy part of it. But with that changes, then, you know, the big oligarch totalitarian stakeholders go, oops, there went $800 trillion of our assets, right?
That's right.
Big problem. Yeah.
Well, we've got some time for questions from
That'd be great. Let's do that.
Internet. So the first one I've got here is, do you know if Travis Walton's infamous abduction experience, which was dramatized in a movie called Fire in the Sky, which gave me nightmares for years after took me to see it at a drive-in when I was like 3. But was that a real abduction by ETs, or was that one of these deep state CIA simulated abductions?
Good question. I mean, I've spoken to Travis Walton about this, and when that film came out, I was appalled because the story he shared personally was not what was portrayed in the movie. So, lesson number 1: Hollywood is always going to ruin a true story and turn it into a horror flick because they think that's going to sell more tickets. The film actually bombed because it was just because of this. What actually happened, I think, probably was ET. He and a buddy or a couple of buddies came across this object up in New Mexico in the forest, I think near Snowflake. And it was damp. They went in and there was an electrostatic discharge that inadvertently went from the craft to him, knocked him back. It was not a death ray. It was an inadvertent, like if you understand how much gigawatts of power those craft generate, it's huge. And so I think it was an accidental discharge, like a lightning strike that hit him. The ETs took him on board on the equivalent of what sounds like an interstellar ICU. And as an emergency doctor, as soon as I heard what they did and how long they kept him, is what we would do if somebody had been electrocuted and their heart had stopped and you wanted to save them. So I think it was an accident. The ET saved him. And after he was stabilized, they returned him back near where he came from. Now, when he was on the ship, what he told me was that initially when he came to, he was freaked out and was trying to attack the ETs, not the other way around. The movie showed the ETs drilling into his eyes. None of that happened. That was all Tracy Torme. I confronted him in Crestone, Colorado in, I think, 93 about this. And I said, wait, that's not what this story is. I know Travis Walton. But then later, the ETs let him sit they went to a larger ship and he was on it. And they let him sit in like the pilot's chair and sort of navigate with touching and thinking to have the craft go places. It was a beautiful story of them sort of like being very gentle with him once he calmed down, and then he was returned. Now that's the story he told me from the horse's mouth. Now what ends up getting embellished and told into Hollywood stories, this is why I'm so skeptical about these things that come out through the UFO subculture, conferences, movies, books, because I do the original research with the people who were actually there, right? So I don't Google this stuff, but I have never seen a case that is actually ever honestly portrayed by the Hollywood and the media once they get their grubby little hands on it, because usually there's an agenda to spin it in some direction, and they're often paid to do it. Now, what Tracy Torme told me was that he was told by the studio that he needed to make it scarier and more like a horror science fiction film to make it pop financially. Instead, because it actually didn't ring true and it was so scary, it bombed. I think something that could have been a true to life Close Encounters of the Third Kind, like the Spielberg movie in the 70s, late 70s, it could have been a huge hit. but you send something to Hollywood to destroy it. I mean, I hate to say it, but
I literally had nightmares for over 10 years.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, you were very young then, I guess.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what happened with.
So we've got another question, and it's a really good one. So I'm going to kind of ask it my own way, though. So you've got these sort of two extreme ends of the UFO subculture. You've got the Elizondos who are out there saying, "Oh, we have nothing like this. This is way beyond human capability." And then you've got the other extreme, which is like the Linda Moulton Howe, the Corey Goode, where they're saying, "Oh, not only do we have this stuff, but we're out in other galaxies, and we have alliances with." These sort of dark ETs and some nice ETs, and we're trading technology, and we're running missions in other universes and stuff like that. So the question from the internet was, is there such a thing as this covert secret space program that is doing operations in other galaxies? Now, my understanding is you've kind of taken this sort of middle ground where it's, we have the technology, but we're confined to our solar system because we're under quarantine. Is that correct? And can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. And by the way, it's not taking a position. It's learning from the people who are directly involved, who are direct firsthand operators at covert sites and in the aerospace world that I have debriefed for 35 years. So, it's not like I'm dredging fourth-hand junk up off the internet and come up with an opinion worth nothing. I hate to say this. I'm not trying to be bombastic. So I push back on that. No, it's based on the fact that I have debriefed pushing 1,000 guys and women, many of whom have been involved at the upper end of those programs. None of them. Now, have we gone to the moon and Mars? Yes. Did that ARV that you see that was at Norton Air Force Base, you can put that up, that was in the hangar, to 3 of them, did those go around our solar system? Yes, before we landed on the moon. But do we have a program going out interstellar, intergalactic? No, because the ETs aren't going to allow that until we become nominally civilized. Now, it makes for a very good space cowboy movie to have a rogue group of humans working with these evil aliens, and then the good ones, and it's great for Star Wars and Independence Day and selling tickets to UFO conferences, books, and videos. But if I had any evidence of that, I would change what I'm saying. But I have never met a single person, no matter how high up in that organization or how operational on boots on the ground, who say any such thing, number one. Number two, the other part of it is that, and this it's implied in much of what I've said over the years, but I need to be more explicit. And that's my failure. I have never debriefed an operator who has been on retrieval teams dealing with the ETs that have ever encountered a hostile or violent one. They've never picked up a reptilian. Now, there are people I know who have been at facilities where man-made fake aliens, so-called program life forms, that look really scary, but those are human-made. But the ones who picked up, let's call them actual non-human ETs from other star systems, none of them look like that, and none of them behave like that. Now, I would think that if given the depth and the breadth of the people I have debriefed, if any of this mythology were true, at least a couple of them would have in fact seen and have that information. No, you look at what Jake Barber said about the beautiful connection he had with an ET that was in one of these craft. Sergeant Clifford Stone recounted the same experience. The witness that's in this new illustrated book that I did with Michael Schratt, that has TE. I referred to him earlier. He had this direct encounter with these 2 ETs from the ship they had downed that hadn't been damaged. And he said they were the most beautiful. I have not talked to a single, and let me add one more data point. I have been head of a CE5 contact operation since this 1990. This is the 35-year anniversary. Thousands and thousands of hours at hundreds of venues where we've had real contact and events happen, and where we've had ETs come right into the area, and none of them have looked like that, and none of them have harmed us. We have had some nasty things unleashed on us from covert human operations when they thought they could deceive us, but we've never had that. So that is a scientific research data point, so you're going out there, you're inviting contact, and all the contact for 35 years involving thousands of events and thousands of people across multiple continents. None of them have looked like that, and no one has ever been harmed. So now I will take all of what I just said in terms of firsthand direct whistleblowers, people on retrieval teams, our collective experience as a group doing CE5 globally for 35 years over the mythology that sells movies and tickets and books for people who want to have the bejeebies scared out of them. One of the problems is, again, if you don't do the firsthand direct research, and this was so intuitive to me as a young doctor in the 90s, I thought, well, wait, you have these people who claim to be experts in the UFO subject, but then they'll brag, well, I've never seen one, or I've never had contact. Then somehow that makes them objective. No. Would you go to a cardiologist that's actually never seen a heart? Would you go to a neurosurgeon who's never seen a brain? Would you see a dermatologist who doesn't know what skin is? Why are you an expert? I'm going to call this out. And you haven't gone out in the field and done the direct work to observe, make contact. You know what you're talking about. You're not an expert. You're getting stuff from what? Second, third, fourth, fifth hand? That an expert doesn't make. So I want to be very clear on this, that this is why the CE5 contact operation and protocols, we're recommending it be officially done by governments. France almost did it, but they did a one weekend thing with us back years ago in 2010 or 11 or something. It's in the archive, the Ministry of Defense of France. But no country has ever done a sustained effort for peaceful contact. Now, we have plenty of evidence that there are operations used to target and shoot down ET craft, military operations that are more military driven and materiel driven to get the technology to reverse engineer, et cetera. But in terms of doing what we're talking about, I think that needs to be the model once disclosure happens, if it's not this scary false one that stampedes the world into Armageddon. Then we pivot to, all right, let the countries of the world develop a means to make contact peacefully and see if we can reach out to these civilizations in a cooperative manner for both Earth and space. But that hasn't happened. If it did happen, there's very scant record of it in the 50s during the Eisenhower era, where there could have been an outreach like that went sideways. What I understand is that, and I can't prove this, is that there was a meeting between Eisenhower and ETs out in the desert near Muroc, where Edwards Air Force Base is now, and that they really wanted us to cooperate with them and get rid of these nuclear weapons and become peaceful. The warmongers around Eisenhower said, no way. Eisenhower was inclined to say yes. And that's why they separated the president from those operations in the late 50s. And to my knowledge, this is why it's been dysfunctional ever since. Because the war profiteers, the warmongers, the sociopaths, the people who want to control the technology, those people surpassed control access, let's call it, from the president and the Congress. And it's gone sideways for almost around 65 years now. So, and by the way, that was why Kennedy was killed, because he was determined to get control of this. He fired Allen Dulles, CIA director, who helped found the CIA. And my understanding is that they went, oh no, you're not going to do this. And in November of 63, of course, everybody knows he was killed. My understanding is that the truth about that assassination is very directly connected to him trying to get back under control of these UAP, UFO programs.
So we've got another question, which is actually a really interesting one. There is this footage that has been circulating and getting so much attention and so much debate, and it's allegedly of the MH370 commercial airplane that had disappeared. And I'll put the footage up, but you can see these three orbs circling it, and then there's this pop of light, and it dematerializes. So there's so much debunking of the video, and then there's debunking of the debunkers, and I don't know what to make of this. There's this guy Ashton Forbes who's been championing this, and I reached out to him, never heard back. So whatever. But the question is this real, and is this the kind of man-made technology that would be used in a false flag attack and blamed on extraterrestrials?
The first question, is it real? I don't know. I don't have the provenance for it. The second question is yes, because that capability, I think it's an Einstein-Rosen bridge is what they're doing, if you want to look that up. And we have a scientist on our team who's worked at a very senior NSA and corporate level who has said it is real, and it was an Einstein-Rosen bridge, and it was man-made, and it was a test. Now, I don't know if that's true, because again, the actual footage itself, I always say, well, what's the provenance of it? Where did it come from? Who had it? And honestly, I don't have that information, and I don't have anyone on my team who has a direct access to it, the origins of that footage. Now, maybe this gentleman you mentioned does, or maybe someone he knows does. I don't know. But the people I think do have some good information, what it portrays is something that we absolutely can do. And remember, during the drone stuff, where there are obviously just drones with motors, and then there were orbs, and 100% of that was man-made. None of that was alien. And it was sort of a testing of this false flag, and to what extent the media and the Congress and the hysteria and the circus all around it. As for that MH flight, all I can say is it's obviously went missing. This someone has said this is real footage. Now, let's just say, I don't know if it is, but if it is, I've had people look at it and say, oh yeah, we have that capability for sure.
Got it. Wow, that is absolutely terrifying. The next question is, human structures and bases on the moon and Mars. So, and the question is, like, we know that these structures are there.
Right.
We've seen the images. We have the whistleblowers, but was there a human base on Mars that was destroyed by ETs or by somebody else?
Well, my understanding is that there are ancient structures and remnants of an ancient presence on Mars and the moon, but there are also more recent structures that are the result of the fact, going back now to that we have had electrogravitic and the ability to move very quickly without a rocket through our solar system since the mid 1950s. That there very well could be assets. I know there are on the moon. So we know that from Carl Wolf. Some of them were very ancient, but there were some new looking structures. I don't think those new ones are ET. I think those new ones are human, which would make sense if you have that capability. Now, one of our witnesses also knew a Navy SEAL who has not come forward, who was part of a team, and he would call a hyper jump for 2 weeks at a time to a facility on the moon. So, I've heard those sort of accounts. It would make sense that we would, since we have the technology, that this covert clandestine group would do that. But I think when you look at those images, the ancient ones often get mixed up with the newer ones. I think the newer ones are not extraterrestrial. I think the newer ones are most likely human. I do know that out by the rings of Saturn, that both a senior executive with Lockheed Martin at the headquarters out there outside DC in Maryland called me up back when, the Cassini probe was going out, and they were the prime contractors, and they filtered out before NASA saw them this footage of a massive extraterrestrial floating base. It was out by the rings. It wasn't, there in the planet. That was huge. I mean, it sounded like it was many miles across. I also have a member of my team who had been at NORAD, and back there was a Console 50 that was used to track the Deep Space Network, and they had tracked a massive extraterrestrial base. You could say it's a craft, but my understanding is a huge base, many, many miles across. One of them indicated something on the order of several hundred miles across, like a small moon, that had craft within it. And that was out by Saturn also. And then the final data point was that the top scientist at the Naval Research Labs was friends with a 4-star general who'd come out of a briefing where he had been shown these same images, and he was white as a ghost. And that the head of the Naval Research Labs, Rick Foch, was the highest scientist there. He was not the director of the lab. He would be like the third down, but he was the top scientist there. He said absolutely that is real, and that this 4-star general confirmed that to him. He didn't see it, but the 4-star did. So yeah, I mean, there are these sort of ET assets. They're very large. That's why back in '92, I turned to General Stubblebine when he was first trying to buy me off with $2 billion and then threaten me. I said, look, you have your plan, and there's another plan. There's a divine plan. There's an interstellar plan. And I'll tell you, when the day is done, which one's going to prevail. And it won't be yours. I mean, you know how I am, Michael. I just said right to his face.
Oh, yeah. We've met.
Yeah, we've met. So, that's not a myth. I've had 3 very reliable, probably a very senior executive at Lockheed Martin, this scientist at Naval Research Labs, right? And a military advisor for years who had been in the compartmented console area where they were doing deep space network monitoring out of Cheyenne Mountain for NORAD in Colorado Springs, who also had it confirmed to him that on that console, by the way, that area was so sensitive that at the outside wall of it, if someone even leaned on that wall, guards with M16s and attacked German Shepherds would come out. And these are people cleared to be in NORAD. So it was a very tightly held area. And we have a man on our team who was in there and saw that decades ago.
We have another fantastic question. So this one is, with all of these horrible events that have been happening lately, the extreme wildfires, hurricanes, bridge collapse, now we've got volcanoes rumbling. Is there any evidence that any of this is like a shot across the bow or warning shots to people in government who are, investigating these man-made technologies that are so closely guarded that, hey, don't come too close, stop asking questions, because we can just wreak utter destruction?
Well, we know they have that capability for sure. Whether those specific events are related to that or not, I don't know. I know that back years ago, early 2000s, I look up the date, there was a massive subduction earthquake and tsunami that killed 250,000 people in Indonesia and all that area. I may have been 2004, somewhere around there. And I had a man who was on a contract vessel for the National Security Agency and a covert government operation that went down there, and they basically detonated a type of a directional energy weapon over that subduction zone to see if it would trigger it. And this man, very legit, said that's what they did. We know that Eric Hecker, who was a Raytheon gentleman who was at our National Press Club event in June of 2023, he was at the South Pole where the Raytheon had a mile under the ice, this big neutrino light array. And it's not just sensing passively, it's an active warfare system that when they switched that on, it caused, he is pretty sure they felt, all the massive earthquakes in Christchurch in New Zealand that were so devastating. So we have our Colonel Heckert, back when before they had those electromagnetic weapons, he knew of the fact that they had what they called nuclear torpedoes that had been placed on the earthquake faults in various places around the world that could be detonated and then trigger a massive earthquake and a subsequent tsunami to wipe out the coastlines. He knew specifically about that, knows specifically about it. So, this is why I tell people all the 5 alarm fires that people think are important with Ukraine and Israel, Taiwan, China, they're important, but this organization that have these capabilities, if they are not put on a leash and those capabilities taken out of their hands, it's a much bigger threat to the United States, but also to the earth than anything that the National Security Council is looking at right now. So this is why, and I've known this since the 90s. The other data point is one of the operators at this black site, a couple of the black sites out west, who came under cover to that conference in June of 2024. He pulled me aside one evening and we had a meeting in the green room where I was. And he said, I was read into an operation that we had used these technologies to grab an asteroid and move it in the direction like it's coming from the sun. And so that it would not hit the Earth, that it would skim low over the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to cause massive tsunamis, wiping out all the coastlines. And that was in going on. It was coming in. And the ETs, he said, moved in and took it out and protected us. So interesting, I almost feel like I'm like a one-man anti-defamation league for the ETs, but they have saved our bacon more ways than people realize. And this man knows this. He knows this for a fact. Now, he didn't know I knew this. I said, oh, yeah, I was read into this years ago by someone who was operational with those technologies. So you have a bunch of psychopaths and sociopaths who have these technologies who want to create panic, fear, maybe population decrease, but also want to create the ability to set up a series of events, both what are fake alien, but these man-made induced natural things, so that they could seize control through a sort of a global martial law state and military state. That has always been the plan of these guys. These guys are power hungry, sociopaths, but they have technologies that I'm quite sure if the president and people in Congress knew what they had and what they've done already and what they plan to do, everything else would look like a skirmish and they would focus on this. But I'm not trying to scare people. I just am telling you what I know to be a fact from multiple data points.
So we're nearing the end of the questions here. We got 2 left. You have talked extensively on this show and also in your recent media appearances about the eschatologists, the hardcore evangelical Christians and Catholics who want to bring about an end of the world scenario. Mm-hmm. And they are religiously motivated to participate in either the cover up or distortion of the truth related to this matter. Right. This question is about a satanic element in the within this group that is maintaining the secrecy. So is there, I already know the answer, but is there a satanic element in this cabal that controls this issue?
Sure. I mean, it's 2 sides of a coin. You have the people who are very religious, but who believe, like Prince Hans Adam von Liechtenstein did, that we had to create Armageddon so Christ would return, right? There's a whole section of those. And then the flip side of that same coin are the people who are like really love the idea of evil, death, destruction, torture, everything you want to call it evil, just satanic, whatever, who literally are involved with that and who love that. And, and I've met both from both ends of the spectrum. Now, this is not to say that everyone who's a very conservative religious person buys into that and wants that. I'm talking about an extremist group that is part of that organization. Because remember, this organization is like a whole constellation of people working because they have a common objective. That's one extreme. The other would be global macroeconomic energy control. The other one is the military industrial, profiteering complex. They're all in some of them wear multiple hats, right? But ultimately it's a very messed up situation. And I have met people from those, let's call it factions, and they're pretty spooky people. And unfortunately, a lot of people, you can be kind of hoodwinked on this because what I call the folks on the more evil end of weird stuff and Stranger Things, I call it electromagnetic black magic. They have technologies that can conjure up, and we're not talking some weird satanic ritual, except that it may bring into this dimension some really scary stuff, but it's being done through a high-tech system where they can tap into a lower dimension. And this is why I always point, when I go to a meeting, I go, you have three things going on here: the actual ET, the actual man-made, and then the extra dimensional or interdimensional that can be confused with both. And a subset of the interdimensional or extra dimensional are the ones that are induced through humans through these very, very high-tech systems. So there's more than one scientist I've met with where when they hit a certain frequency in the electromagnetic and resonance, it can pop out of another dimension an object or a being that comes into 3D and not a hologram, physically runs around the lab. Now, I've heard this, these are like the stories of Montauk back in the day that got spun into I never saw any of the episodes, something called Stranger Things. I guess it was on Netflix. And so this capability must certainly exist. And some of those folks, it's like you have innate remote viewing capabilities in the CIA with Russell Targ and McMonagh, all those folks, right? But then you have something above where they were operating that are the electronic assist systems for consciousness that are human, based on studying the ET systems back in the 40s and 50s. And we could do a whole show on just that. It's fascinating. But so they have a corollary here with inter and extra dimensional weird things like at the Skinwalker Ranch or the Bradshaw Ranch or Stranger Things sort of Montauk, but where there's an innate, say, a bizarre phenomenon that happened that's not extraterrestrial, it's extra dimensional, but that can also be induced through these very advanced physics and electromagnetic sciences, scientific systems that can, and some of that I think was accidentally discovered. I know a man down near the Marshall Space Flight Center in the Redstone Arsenal who accidentally did that. He just hit a certain frequency because he was working on this under contract from the CIA, from IT&T, and boom, pops what stuff would disappear, pop right into this dimension. Weird stuff. Okay, this is why at the agency they call it WSFM, Weird Science and Frickin' Magic. And when I talked to an engineer at Northrop Grumman once, he said, "Well, we just call it PFM, pure fucking magic." He said, "Literally, that's what we call it." So there's a whole spectrum. Everyone thinks of a man-made clunky UFO, but boy, there's a lot of things on that spectrum that's in their little dark little basket of secrets technologically that we could do multiple shows on, that I've been read into and have met people who have been operational or have been the principal investigators and scientists who dealt with this. I mean, it's fascinating. It's spooky, but it's very, very fascinating.
We should sell mugs that say pure fucking magic.
There you go.
So last question, which kind of sort of relates to what you were actually just saying. This is, again, from the internet. What about the Hadron Collider in Kensington? Could that be the source of these orbs, is what the person asked, but could this be the source of some of this phenomenon, or how is it related to what people are saying?
Well, it certainly could be. I don't have any actual intelligence from a source about that particular facility. But there is no question. I mean, look, let's go back to the Disclosure Project archive circa 2000, when I interviewed a gentleman, Fred Threadfeld, who had been, and he had been at a Air Force base in Canada, operated by U.S., where they had mastered in 1953 the teleportation of ash, of course, everybody smoked after World War II, ashtrays that would go from point A to point B instantly, a big object, reliably from one point of the base to the other. And he saw this. Now, I know that's true. Now, most people go, what? I say, yeah, that was 72 years ago. So now, when you start getting into this area of science and physics and electromagnetism, you very quickly get into a world of very strange things in WSFM. And one of the big problems with UFO research is that when you're evaluating some phenomenon, you've got to have in your knowledge this whole spectrum: man-made, ET, innate, extra-dimensional, and then augmented, let's say, induced things from other dimensions that are human. All of that has to be in your, as we say in medicine, your differential diagnosis. It's like you have chest pain. What is it, right? Or I just had this abdominal thing. You have abdominal, well, is it, something you ate? Or is it, a gallbladder? Or is it, a virus? Or is it, you had some bad water that had Giardia in it? Or it's, something with your intestine, a blockage? Or is it, there's like 100 things in your differential diagnosis. But what happens with the UFO subject, everything is alien, right? Anything goes bump in the night. And this is not helpful because the intelligence community operatives are so smart. They know how to mix all this together and confuse people. It's the art of deception. And what we have to do is, this has got to be childhood's end, because I think all this is going to come out in the next year or two. We have to begin to unpack all of it. And the part that is extraterrestrial, get clarity on. The part that's man-made, get clarity on. Weird things from other dimensions, we need to get clarity on. Like there's somebody I know who was recently on a show talking about the Bradshaw Ranch near Sedona, talking about that was a secret alien base. No, it's not. I've had people on my team get very close to it and see guys dressed all in black with machine guns guarding down below the hill where it's a black site. It's a U.S. or transnational corrupt organization, black site, right? Skinwalker got taken over by those elements with Bigelow and Colonel Alexander long before the current owner. And they set up all kinds of weird stuff there. So, you either understand this or you don't, but I'm trying to put enough information out to the public so they're not continually misdirected and deceived through the magic trick, because look, when you've got the kind of technologies these guys have in these covert and illegally run programs, boy, it is easy to fool people. They can fool CE5 contact people, can fool government people. Right. Certainly the general media and your average bear who's in the Congress or Senate or White House, very easily deceived.
So to wrap it up, do you want to talk about the upcoming CE5 cruise that you're doing and how people can tune into that if they want to?
Oh, yeah. So here's a great opportunity, like pivoting now to something really beautiful. We're going to be on April 6th, launching out of Port of Fort Lauderdale, all through the Caribbean for 6 nights. 4 of those nights, we're going to have 200 people with me up on the upper deck doing meditation and CE5 contact in the middle of the ocean. But we've paid to have a link so we can webinar it, so you can participate, so we can do global CE5 contact with me and these 200 people for those 4 nights. And then there are 2 days while we're at sea, where the whole days will be in an auditorium, and we'll be webinaring that out, going through the updates on disclosure, all the information you need to know about the cosmology, meditation, meditation training. We're going to be doing all that. So if you want to join us, you can join us by webinar. We weren't sure until a couple weeks ago that we'd get that signal, but now we've arranged so we can have an uplink that will be able to transmit it. So that should be great.